There's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters this podcast was recorded on.
It's just after 9:30 p.m. in Ontario, Canada, on November 8, 2010, and Jennifer Pan is upstairs in her bedroom watching TV and chatting on the phone to a friend. Her dad, Han, is in the study reading the Vietnamese news, and her mum, Bic, is soaking her feet in some warm water after her usual Monday night line dancing class. Suddenly, her mum calls for Han to come downstairs, but she's speaking in English, which is unusual. Jennifer hangs up her phone call and sits, frozen, as she starts to hear mumbled, unfamiliar voices. When she eventually plucks up the courage to open the door, a man is standing in her doorway. Holding a gun, he ties her hands behind her back and demands to know, where is the money? She quickly produces the $2,000 she's been saving up to buy a new iPhone before a second man appears and they force her into her parents' bedroom. As they find some cash in a bedside table, she can hear her mother in another room being yelled at. A third man is demanding her wallet. Then, Jennifer is tied to an upstairs banister, while her parents are led into the basement. You lied to us, she hears, before two pops go off. Her mother screams. A few more pops echo through the house. Jennifer manages to manoeuvre herself to make a 911 call.
Help me, please. I need help. Ma'am, calm down. What's going on? Some people broke into our house and they just showed all his money. Okay, ma'am. Where are you? Avenue Road? Can you spell the street name for me, please? Dad? Ma'am. Hello?
But as police arrive at the ordinary suburban home to find one person dead, one person seriously injured, 3 people on the run and a terrified Jennifer, what they're about to discover is this crime is not as it seems. I'm Gemma Barth, and this is True Crime Conversations, a Mamamia podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. 53-year-old Bic Pan was shot dead in her basement on that November evening in 2010. Her husband Han was also shot. A bullet hit him in the face, and he only lived because it narrowly missed a vital artery when it travelled downwards, lodging itself in his neck. After arriving at hospital, doctors made the difficult decision to place him in an induced coma, where he remained for 3 days. Their daughter, 24-year-old Jennifer, was also home when 3 men burst into the Pan family home. She was tied up but unharmed. Their son Felix was at university when the attack happened. From the very start, something wasn't right. As Jennifer started to recall the events of the night to detectives, there were holes in her story. How did the men get into the house? Why were her parents attacked while she was left alone? If they were after money, why did they leave behind jewellery and cash from her parents' wallets?
We listened to the 911 call several times.
I'm tied upstairs.
We went over it frame by frame, listening to it, playing it back, and dissecting what had happened. All the time, what bothered me was the fact that how is she able to make a phone call while her hands are tied behind her back to a banister?
You're now bound to the railing. Can you show me, can you stand up and turn around and tell me, just show on the camera, how your hands are bound?
Just tell you.
Take it out of a traumatizing event, which it is, and put yourself into a more clinical position, because I want to see how you could physically get your phone out of your waistband. Just stand up and focus in on how you did it.
As detectives continued to dig, they discovered something shocking. Jennifer Pan wasn't who she said she was. She wasn't who her parents thought she was, anyway. she was living a complete double life, hiding secrets that would devastate her parents. She was, in fact, an expert liar, and she was using that skill to deceive police too. Today we're going to unpack how Jennifer found herself inside a prison cell, sentenced to 25 years for murder and attempted murder alongside her ex-boyfriend and 3 other men. To help us make sense of the facts, we're joined by Alan R. Warren, author of Deadly Betrayal, the true story of Jennifer Pan. Alan joins us now. Alan, can you talk us through the Pan family, a bit of background? Who were they and what did their life look like as a family in Markham, Ontario? From the outside, anyway.
Well, from the outside, they look like an average family. Both parents worked. They both worked for a car manufacturer. Like, what they did was make parts for cars at Magna, which was a good job for both. So they were a good middle-class family, 2 kids. They had Jennifer and Felix, who were about 3 years apart in age. And they lived in a fairly good neighborhood, fairly quiet, nice home. And they were considered a hardworking, quiet family.
And quite traditional in the way they ran their lives and raised their children?
Oh, yeah, very traditional. The parents came from Vietnam back in the late 70s, 79, I believe it was. And they had traditional values, good upbringing. The kids were in school, and it was a little stricter than probably the average Canadian family because they were expected to do a lot more and achieve a lot more. And it was very important, especially to the father in the Pan family.
At the start of this episode, we detail the night of November 8, 2010 through Jennifer's eyes, or the account that she gives. I want you to talk us through it from more of the emergency responders' eyes. When they arrived on that scene, what did they find?
I think from the emergency responders, the police and medics, their point of view, it was a very vicious attack. They saw a lot of blood, a lot of things disheveled. It was a mess. It looked like a home invasion in their point of view, and 2 people had been shot. The mother was shot dead, so on arrival, she was already dead. The father was shot, but he wasn't dead, but he was in critical condition. So there was a lot of turmoil. It was a surprise for the whole area. Nobody expected that kind of an attack in such a quiet neighborhood and a quiet area of town. So it was very unusual. I think they were caught off guard, quite a surprise for them.
What about Jennifer? What state was she in? Was she still tied to a banister when they arrived?
Yeah, when the police arrived, originally she still had the ties around her, and she was traumatized, or she appeared to be traumatized. She was very emotional and crying and upset at the time.
Within a few hours of police arriving, Jennifer is sitting in a police interview room being formally interviewed about what she saw and what she experienced. How did you find that chat? What did you pick up? Was there anything particularly odd that jumped out at you in that initial conversation?
Well, in the very first one, she was very upset. She was very broken up, which was what you would expect. I don't know that I would have thought anything from her personal interview originally would have really thrown me. There was questions, but everybody deals with grief differently, and that kind of a trauma, you wouldn't necessarily jump to any conclusions from the first interview. Looking back at it, you could pick out a few things, but initially you would kind of take it as it comes. She was really upset.
And she almost had a bit of a naivety to her, is what I thought. She kept saying to the police officers, I don't want to say anything wrong. And you kind of really felt for her. She looks a lot younger than she is. She's 24, but she looks quite young. And I really felt for her when I first watched that initial interview.
Oh, yeah. And that's kind of what I mean, because everyone deals with it differently, something that happens to them, the trauma. And I kind of took her as it was. Seemed very naive, you're right. And she seemed very young, much younger than she is. And I think that played with it. I think that made it even more believable, her breaking down her little upset things. She was very believable.
It's a well-known police tactic to get people to continuously repeat what they saw or what they experienced, not necessarily to catch them out. Often it's just to catch details someone might have missed in the first place. But in Jennifer's retellings, things start to get a bit weird. She has a lot of inconsistencies. Can you walk us through some of those?
Well, I think the thing with her inconsistency, she didn't really respond how they expected her to, and they kept on asking her things. She wasn't confident in how she responded. It was almost like she had to think about it, and it seemed to confuse her when they questioned her over and over. So I think that was probably the biggest problem in the very first interview.
How does she describe her family life in those initial chats?
The initial time, the way she talked about things, like, because she went down and said goodnight to her mother, she said, and it seemed like it was a very normal sort of evening for her originally.
She becomes almost scared, like annoyed, when she finds out her brother is being interviewed by police in the next room, and she also gets a bit weird when police start talking about going through her text messages and her phone use. For me, that kind of was like, once again, that naivety. Maybe she didn't understand what happens in a police interview. Perhaps she thought that police would just take her on her word. What did you think about all of that?
Yeah, I think she acted like she thought they would just believe her and there would be no real questions, much deeper than some of the surface stuff that they were asking. It's hard to say what she was thinking at the time, and when this was all planned, what was going through her mind, what she thought police would actually put her through. I don't know that she expected as much detail and as many interviews as she got and how long they lasted. I think that all sort of took her by surprise, and I'm not sure why, because there's been a murder and an attempted murder, so I don't know why she would have thought it would have been easier, and why her brother wouldn't be questioned and neighbors and friends and stuff like that. She didn't plan for a lot of questions.
As the investigators started to properly look into potential motives and the nature of the crime, they kind of figured out that something wasn't quite right with the whole scene, the level of violence, the targeting of one home on the street, the fact that 2 people were shot. Jennifer was left alone. There was money left in wallets, so that didn't gel. Everything just didn't quite fit, did it?
Well, yeah, in this type of home invasion where they had no problem shooting both the parents for dead, like they had the intention of killing both, why they wouldn't kill her. And her response was because I cooperated. But that didn't seem to work. There was nothing they needed from her in her, as she says, cooperation. There really wasn't. And plus, why would they not take all of the money or valuables that they could have at the time? If that's the intention of the crime, is to steal money and property or anything valuable, that was sort of not quite believable. Like, that left a big question of like, what was going on here? Why wouldn't they go further? Why didn't they shoot Jennifer? What was going on?
The 911 call was also a bit weird to investigators. Why was that?
Well, mainly because she said that she had her phone on her cell phone, and she had it in the back pocket, I believe the left one, she said. And so they tied her up against the banister rail, kind of like there's like the stair rails up on the top, on the main, I guess, platform you would call it. And they tied her around her shoulders, and then they had her hands tied behind her back. So they kind of thought, well, that would be kind of an awkward place. Like, how would she get the phone and call 911? And so they asked her to demonstrate, and she did demonstrate, but it wasn't something that they were really buying into, because how would she hear the operator? She had to scream. There was a lot of things that didn't fit, and it didn't sound like what she was doing when she was making the call. Like, it didn't jive with how they expected it to happen. So that in itself made them question her as well.
As you said, she kind of said that she yelled into the microphone of the camera from a distance, but when you actually listen to the call, it really doesn't sound like that.
Yeah. And plus, how did she hear the operator? And she said, well, I had the volume turned up. That isn't true. That doesn't work. What it did was it didn't convince them of anything. The cops thought, well, you're not telling us everything. Why is she holding back things? And why is she not being direct and honest? There's something that she's not being honest about. She's not being forthcoming with. And I think that was kind of made them caution about her. They were kind of, ooh, what's going on here? What is it that she's hiding?
You're listening to True Crime Conversations with me, Gemma Barth. I'm speaking with author Alan R. Warren about the true story of Jennifer Pan. Up next, we explore information given by an anonymous informant which gives police their biggest break in the case. Let's take a step back for a minute. How did the news and the media and the community react to what had happened, this crazy home invasion, one person dead, one injured, one terrified? Because you mentioned before that Markham was quite a suburban, safe area. Was it everywhere? Was it all over the news?
Oh, yeah. Like as soon as it hit, it became a big story because on the surface, the media is reporting it as 2 people were shot. One of them was killed. It was a home invasion, and it was a family working class family in Markham, which was a suburb of Toronto, really. It's quite a distance, but it's a very quiet community. They have a low crime rate, almost nothing. I mean, Canadian crime rate is low anyway, and especially when you're involving shootings and or murders. That just doesn't happen. So it was a shock. It's like, wow, what's going on here and why? So this brought to attention, a lot of people were like, well, was this random? So what's going on? And people were kind of scared because this wasn't a family that would be a typical target, right? We're not talking a real wealthy, well-to-do family. They were certainly a middle-class working family, but they are one of thousands within that town. So why were they chosen? And if it was random, that kind of put a lot of people on alarm in the area. It's like, is there just random people going around knocking on the door and robbing you? I think it scared a lot of people.
Locals were told to keep an eye out for 3 men. That's who they were told invaded this home. Were there descriptions? Do you remember them being circulated at the time?
Yeah, because they got descriptions off of Jennifer, and they were obviously made to try and fool the police in some way, because she really said that there was 2 black men, dark-skinned men, and there was a third that had a Jamaican accent, and she described one of them having dreadlocks. So she completely described 3 characters that were not exactly what would fit with the real people. So it sort of was there, and it was kind of confusing, but you kind of know why she did it, I guess, looking back at it. But at the time, so they were looking for 3 foreign colored men.
I want to point out for listeners at this point of the story that Han, Jennifer's father, was still in a coma at this point. So they really only had Jennifer's version of events to go by. But one of their first major breaks was getting onto her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend, Daniel, which actually came through to them via an anonymous informant. What does he kind of lift the lid on?
Well, Daniel Wong was a low drug dealer. Like, it wasn't dealing in major drug exchanges, but he was selling a lot of drugs, and he had been arrested before and had been in and out of trouble for different things like that, minor felonies and drug charges and stuff like that. And so that sort of opened the eyes of the police. We thought, oh, okay, what's going on here? Because she was dating him on and off for years. The family didn't like him. They didn't want her dating this guy, because not only was he a drug dealer on and off, but he was also not making much money. He didn't finish school. There was a lot of things that they didn't like about him. They never invited him over. They never wanted him there. And then during the interview, he mentioned how they had separated. They broke up as a couple. He was seeing someone new now, Christina, I believe. And what was going on was they were getting anonymous texts and phone calls where people would phone both of them and hang up, or send them texts saying really bad things, and lots of texts. And Jennifer even claimed or told him, Dan Wong, the boyfriend, that she was being threatened and followed. And even one time she said that she was attacked. And she believed it was from his new girlfriend. Like, she was kind of putting it toward that. But police didn't really pick up on that. They were thinking, well, wow, so this might be drug-related or related to the Wong character because of his drug dealings and the people he was probably surrounded. He opened up a lot of questions and made them look at the family a little bit differently.
Well, he also showed Jennifer to be a liar. They didn't know the extent of it at this point, but she was akin to lying here and there to her family, especially about him. Once they found out that she was still dating him, they kind of got pretty strict with her, didn't they?
Yeah, well, because they started thinking, well, you can't see this boy anymore, and there was like bad stuff happening. So the father started driving her everywhere, to classes, to her skating class, like her training, and also her piano classes. They started like watching her and not allowing her out. And there's even a time where he took away her cell phone from her.
So obviously that's got some questions. They bring Jennifer back in. Does she expand on that, or is she still keeping things close to her chest?
No, she talked about it somewhat. Of course, not the same way that Daniel Wong did, but she did say that her father didn't want her seeing him and didn't want her going out and doing things, and wanted her to be focused and become successful in the things that she was being trained for. So she did have that problem with the parents, and she did realize that.
To what extent was Jennifer lying to her parents? Because she was very manipulative. She was creating bogus documents and faking university degrees. Her lies had almost swallowed her a bit.
Yeah, because at school, she wasn't doing as well as she claimed she was. Her first forgery, so to speak, or photoshopping was of her report cards, saying she had better marks than she did get in actuality. And then next on was the diploma, and then she started going to university, but she wasn't really going to university. So she was telling her parents that she was, and that she was going to go for pharmacology, I believe, at the University of Toronto. So even that, when she was going to school, she would fake. She didn't really go to school. And even though her father would drive her there, she was really spending time with Daniel Wong on and off, and other different friends as well, not just him. And so she faked that all the way through and lied to them about going to university and even getting a diploma from university. And she actually made that up. She claimed through Photoshop, but I think there's a few other things she used as well, not just Photoshop. So she faked all of that to the parents.
So at this point we have someone who has been lying, but, it's mainly about family stuff. And then we've got a crime scene that doesn't really fit. So investigators are definitely looking at Jennifer, but they don't have anything really very concrete. But Han wakes up from his coma on November 12. How did that change everything? Because suddenly they have another version of events.
Right. Well, the father, Han Van, he said that during the invasion, of course, he saw his daughter, Jennifer, and when she came down the stairs, she was with two of the different attackers, home invaders, and she was having casual and light conversation with them. Like, she wasn't tied up. She wasn't being forced to do anything. They weren't threatening her or dragging her or beating her or anything like that. She was, with them, and almost looked like she was a part of the scenario going on, or she knew them at least. So that sort of changed the whole tone of what had happened to the family and the home invasion throughout the whole time period. So this was a real shocker because they didn't expect that. They knew she was a liar and she wasn't really telling the truth, but it was to save face more than this. This was an actual murder, or intentional murder and robbery that she was involved in.
So her dad has obviously told the truth to the investigators. Do we know if he thought that she was involved or he was just telling them what he saw?
He knew that she had something to do with it for sure. He even told one of the officers to find out what she was responsible for. He also didn't want her in visiting her. And eventually it became a lifelong ban of her even seeing him. So, yeah, he knew there was something else going on. He didn't know the details at that time, but he wanted them to find out, the police.
Despite all of this happening, a few days later, Jennifer's mum is laid to rest. They have her funeral on November 15th. Was Jennifer weird during that? Is there anything of note to discuss about that event?
I think it's more weird looking back at it, knowing she was involved. At the time, she was upset and she saved face, and she was with the brother at the time, and she did things. But again, not enough to make you think, oh, she was a killer and all this stuff. More so looking back at it. It's weirder looking back at it, knowing that she was involved in this and being at the funeral than at the time.
Yeah, I was watching an interview with one of her friends who said in hindsight he noticed that she was crying, but there were no tears. So it was stuff like that, right, where he didn't think anything of it at the time, but in hindsight he was like, hey, actually, that was a bit weird.
Yeah, it was more like looking back at it and finding out things. You start to put together little things like that. But at the time, again, you sort of think, well, she's grieving. You don't know what she's going through, and everyone grieves differently. So you just kind of, you brush all of the little things off.
Not long after this, Jennifer is interviewed as a suspect for the first time. Do they get a confession out of her? How does she react to that? Obviously, it would be a change of tone from investigators who were, before, they were just interviewing her as a potential victim in a case, but now they were suspecting her. So did she bow to that pressure?
Yeah, well, the third interview was done. They sent in kind of what they consider a lie detector on the force. He was more of a truth enhancer. They had all sorts of names, but he's really someone that detects lies, and that was Bill Gatz. He introduced himself that way, and he also was throwing lies at her, and also right away almost told her that he knew she knew more than she was talking about, that she was involved, and what did she know? Like, why did she plan this occurrence, this event, this attack to happen? Was his angle. So she did know that she was being suspected of something. Initially, of course, she took the lying way out and kind of saying that she wanted them to kill her herself. Like Jennifer wanted to die. She didn't want to live anymore. So she took that kind of an angle with the officer rather than the idea that she hired them to kill the parents. Even that she lied about. So she took a whole new way with him.
Why did she say she wanted to die?
Well, she was kind of going on like she was really hard done by and she didn't want to live, and it wasn't working with the boyfriend who she wanted to spend time with, the parents, and lying about the university and a job. And there was a lot of different angles there.
So now that Jennifer's a suspect, police have access to her phone and her laptop, and they come across a number of incriminating texts and messages. What did they reveal?
They revealed how she was involved in the setup right through the whole time. I mean, and they also learned how she initially hired a friend of Long's, that she wanted to hire him to kill her father. And that didn't happen. And she had connected with all of the people that were involved, including Homeboy, which is Lenford Crawford, who was really one of the key criminals that arranged and set up the home invasion.
Hang on, so Danny Wong is involved?
Yeah, he introduced her to the guy named Homeboy, who was the one that planned the whole home invasion, the whole setup that she wanted. So he was the guy that was right in behind it all. He was introduced to her from Danny Wong.
Why would Danny Wong approve of her killing her parents?
Well, the theory is it was for some money that he wanted and hoped to get some of the money from life insurance, from the home sale, from whatever she got from her parents, from their death.
So from like the life insurance and stuff like that?
Right. Whatever she made, they had a $500,000 home and 2 cars that were, Mercedes and Lexus, and then any life insurance and stuff. And she only had the one brother. So whatever she profited, he would get a percentage of it for helping her.
But was that Jennifer's main motive?
I don't want to speak for her, but I don't think so. She really wanted Daniel Wong back as a boyfriend. She really, I guess, was in love with him. It was something she wanted. And I think it was her way of just being involved with him.
So how many people have we got implicated now? We've got Jennifer, we've got Danny. Is Homeboy one of the people that invade the house, or is he separate? And then we've also got 3 invaders.
No, he was one of the invaders, him as well as Eric Carty and another guy named David Malgallan. The 3 of them were the home invaders. Danny Wong was the introduction, was the one that introduced originally the homeboy, who got Eric and David, his 2 cohorts, to come and do the invasion and set up. So that was kind of how it all worked.
So obviously we've got charges involved here. Everyone's charged. And I want to skip to court because I would love you to talk us through what the prosecution describe as actually happening on that night in terms of the behind-the-scenes organisation, Jennifer's movements. Can you walk us through it?
She was working with a cell phone. She was texting homeboy, and it would be because originally one other night ahead of time she had backed out because of something. Then on the night of the plan, she would text him, and he would say, okay, everything's a go. They would sort of texting back and forth. And once she gave the go-ahead, she waited for her mother to get back from her line dancing. She was part of a club that did line dancing. And so when she got back around 9:30, once she was in the home and downstairs and she was resting and soaking her feet, and her father had retired for the night, she would walk down and said goodnight to her mother, and she went and unlocked the door. Then she came back up the stairs and texted homeboy and saying, yeah, okay, it's all there. And then she was flashing the lights in her bedroom to let them know everything was a go. That was the last thing she had to do. And so then they just walked right in the front door and grabbed both parents. The father out of the bedroom pulled them out into the front room and held them both at gunpoint and started their threats about where's the money and stuff like that. And they shot both parents, killing the mother, but only injuring the father. They shot him in the head, but it went through the eye and down his throat. So they thought he was dead, but he wasn't.
What do we know about Homeboy and the other 2 invaders or murderers? Were they contract killers? Had they done this before? Do we have any background on them?
Well, I wouldn't call them contract killers. They were definitely people that had felonies and had done things before. Homeboy was kind of the ringleader, as I guess we would call him, and arranged everything and set it up and brought in the other 2 to help him. And he had claimed to have done several things and had done lots of minor things, but not to the extent that he claimed. Like he claimed he had killed people for money before and stuff, that I don't think he had quite that as big a record, as big a name as he told them that he had.
Did we have guilty pleas from any of these people involved, or everyone kind of said they were not guilty?
Well, originally everyone said they were not guilty, but they all got convicted of it and were all given life. I think the only person that had a retrial, I believe that was Eric Carty, because he was ill at the time of the trial. They gave him a retrial, and he still got 18 years. Not life, but he got an 18-year sentence.
There wasn't a lot of actual physical evidence. Obviously, they had all the text messages and everything, but they couldn't actually work out who pulled the trigger or the exact details, could they?
They lack the physical evidence of the weapons. So for them to determine of the three who actually did it, they had to rely on each other and their own testimony and their own sworn statements of who they blamed and stuff. So it was tough because you're going by liars' testimonies. They're all sort of giving away the goods on each other, but there was no hard evidence.
Do you remember how Jennifer behaved or acted during that trial? Was she showing any signs of remorse? Was she sitting there silently?
There was no remorse. She'd sat silently. The only time she showed any emotion during the trial itself was when the father was brought in to testify and to talk to the court. That was the only time she had any sort of emotion that you would notice. And even when she was convicted, at first she was really quiet for quite a while before she broke down. So she was very stern. I guess that would be the best way to say it.
Did we ever find out about all of those harassing text messages, where they came from?
It was all Jennifer's. She was behind all of the main stuff. She created all of it. Let's just say that, without giving away too much in the detail. But she was behind most of it.
We've talked about the initial media coverage before we knew about Jennifer and Homeboy and Danny. How did the media react to all of this, though?
They really went to town on her and her involvement and being behind it and hiring people to kill the parents for basically money. And so that was a big shock in the community. But it was also a relief in the sense that there wasn't just random people going around doing home invasions and killing others for their money and possessions. So that was a relief on one side, but it was a shock that such a sweet girl that seemed very nice to the people that knew her would do that.
You mentioned before that Jennifer doesn't have contact with her dad. Does she have contact with any family? Her brother, aunts and uncles, or is she very cut off now?
It's kind of mixed. I think with her brother at first, they were communicating and close, and then they sort of fell apart as of recent times. They sort of had a separation in communications. Most of the family doesn't talk to her and are not too close with her since this. And a lot of her friends too. The ones that talk through the book and through the shows and stuff that are out in different interviews and stuff, they don't know if they can trust her. They feel a distance to her because she had lied to them a lot.
This is one of those stories that we actually have a bit of an update on. It wasn't the end when they all got sentenced. There's a new update in 2024. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, they've all been given a retrial in the case for different reasons. I'm sure the country will be on edge watching to make sure that they remain behind bars, especially Jennifer.
In 2023, Pan was granted a new trial for the murder of her mother, with her conviction overturned. 3 of her co-accused, including her on-again, off-again boyfriend, were granted the same. The panel of judges presiding over the appeal decided that the original trial judge had made a critical error by instructing the jury that they were only able to consider the option of first-degree murder as opposed to also being able to consider second-degree murder or manslaughter. The convictions for the attempted murder of Han, however, remain. In response, the Crown filed its own appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada to decide whether the original decision or the appeal court's decision was correct. At the time of recording, the Supreme Court of Canada is in the process of determining if it will review the case. Thank you for listening to this episode of True Crime Conversations, and thanks to Alan for assisting us to tell this story. You can find his book Deadly Betrayal, the true story of Jennifer Pan, linked in our show notes if you'd like to learn more about this case. True Crime Conversations is a Mamamia podcast hosted and produced by me, Gemma, with audio design by Scott Stronach. Our executive producer is Gia Moylan. I'll be back next week with another True Crime Conversation.